the Rangers Thursday lunchtime series. Thanks, Dr. Beck. He got our recording going. Dr. Goodman was probably going to double check because we had a whammy on her last time, and then she had to re-record for us. So Dr. Beck promised her we'd get that taken care of this go around. Great to see Dr. Goodman back. I'm Dr. Rosalind Biggs. I am a beef cattle extension specialist housed out of the College of Veterinary Medicine. As you will probably remember, Dr. Lallman is kind of our leader on this Rangers Thursday lunchtime series. He's traveling today, and so will not be joining us live, but I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Beck. Introduce yourself, and then we'll turn it over to Dana Zook.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending our Rangers Thursday lunchtime series. I'm Paul Beck. I'm a beef cattle extension specialist housed in the Department of Animal and Food Sciences here in Stillwater. Looking forward to a great session today. Last week, we talked to producers in Western Oklahoma about managing range. We're going to get some more range management today, and then to talk to some great producers in Eastern Oklahoma to look at the other side of our state and how forages differ and require different management. So thank you for attending today.
Thanks, Dr. Beck. Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you. Certainly have diversity right across the state in producers and practices. So great opportunity with this session to look at multiple options. So Dana, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Rosalind. I'm Dana Zook. I'm a area livestock specialist based in Northwest Oklahoma for OSU Extension. So today, Laura Goodman, I'm here to introduce Laura Goodman. She's the OSU Extension Specialist in Rangeland Ecology. She joined the faculty at OSU in 2015, just right after I did. And since then has made a huge impact on education for county educators and landowners across Oklahoma and across, honestly, the United States. She is one of the best resources, in my opinion, for all things related to native grass, brush control, and grazing management. And she joins us today to just give us a report on some of the recent research dealing with range management in her department and some that she's been conducting. So Laura, thanks so much for stepping in today, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dana. So I work on rangeland ecology, and let's see, I think I started working on grazing distribution in 2010. And so we started putting GPS collars on cattle and kind of tracking where they're grazing and trying to figure out different ways that we could change in areas that they were overgrazing, and then get animals to use areas that they were maybe underusing. And so there's kind of two things that we can do when we have overgrazing issues. There might be something off with our stocking rate. Maybe we have too many animals, or maybe we're grazing animals for too long. But the other instance where even when we're having the right stocking weight, but we can still have overgrazing issues, is if we have an issue with distribution. And so historically, we've used lots of different approaches to deal with grazing distribution and modifying that. A lot was done with water development historically, and that was usually done kind of hand in hand with fencing projects. As we fenced new areas, we needed to pipe water or develop water to provide for those animals. For a long time, we've used different rotational grazing practices. We've also used enticements like salt, minerals, protein. We've tried fertilizing pastures in different areas to move animal use around, and then selecting different specific breeds of livestock or specific individuals that may have a stronger tendency to use areas further from water or steeper areas. And so these are kind of all strategies that are pretty well known, and we have a pretty good understanding of how to do this practically. In Oklahoma, we have kind of a kink in some of our management. And one of those things is that we've had a lot of tree spread across the state. Mostly it's been eastern red cedar spread. And so when we're looking at forage availability, that can really limit where forage is growing, because of course eastern red cedar has a very negative impact on our forage growth of our native grasses. And that has negative ecological implications as well for our prairie systems. And so this is data from 1950 to 1985 showing that they were tracking the cedar change even during that period, and that it had changed dramatically in some parts of the state. This was not when cedar started to encroach. It started much, much earlier. And part of the reason that this was happening was that historically we had a lot of wildfire occurring across the landscape. They've used tree ring fire scars to look at fire frequency across the Great Plains. And so you can see the fire return interval here on the map on the left, showing that fires were burning off a good chunk of Texas every 2 to 4 years, most of Oklahoma every 4 to 6 years. And so that was killing eastern red cedar since it doesn't resprout following fire. But in addition to the fire change, we also had the change in tree planting. And so we planted lots of shelter belts, we planted woodlots, we needed wood for, when folks were settling. And so that was an important task that was done. And then following the Dust Bowl between 1935 and 1942, there was a project called the Great Plains Prairie Project, where they were trying to plant shelter belts from the Texas Panhandle all the way up to Canada in these prairie states. And here's some of the trees that were recommended for Oklahoma. We have Chinese elm or Siberian elm, honey locust, American elm, hackberry, Osage orange, of course. Eastern red cedar was included in that. And so that has all impacted our pastures. And so managing forage and distribution can be difficult in the face of trees moving into these areas. So we started doing some projects with prescribed burning. Folks started some of this research actually in 1999 here in the state, and they were looking at how can we continue to graze our pastures while also using prescribed fire to manage our eastern red cedar. And so they started with burning just portions of pastures and allowing cattle to select whether they wanted to graze the burned areas or the unburned areas. What they found was that cattle preferred the regrowth that follows fire, and that our forage grasses respond in a very positive way to fire because it was historically happening so often. And so they were able to rotate cattle around pastures using fire only. So this is a picture from a drone that we took of one of our patch burn pastures, where we have different patches that we burn. We rotate those burns around, and that subsequently rotates our cattle grazing. It also allows us to stockpile forage in our old burns because our cattle are focused on the new burns. And so in the areas that have been burned 2 years prior, they're spending very little time. And so that allows us to stockpile and helps with years where we grow less than normal forage production because of low rainfall. And so others across the Great Plains have also studied this to see what would happen in their states. And so this has now been shown to have positive implications for drought management kind of across the Great Plains and even some states further east like Tennessee. This has also been shown in Colorado. So there's some others that I didn't include here. Here in Oklahoma, many of you might have experienced a pretty droughty year in 2022. And so we went out and sampled our pastures that were grazed continuously year-round in our patch burn pastures, where we're rotating those burns around. And what we found was that in our old burn that our cattle were avoiding, we had stockpiled between 4,400 and 5,200 pounds per acre of forage under continuous grazing at the end of the growing season. And so that's in an area that would typically grow about 3,200, 3,300 pounds per acre annually. And so we had well over the normal production. It was about 2 years, almost 2 years of production stockpiled in that pasture, and we didn't have to destock at all. So this is one of the positive attributes from using this type of management. So we decided to do a project where we actually focused grazing using fire in areas that cattle were avoiding. And so this was done at the Marvin Clemmy Range Research Station in western Oklahoma. This is just south of Clinton, if you're familiar with that part of the state. This is a mixed grass prairie rangeland type. We have a lot of little blue stem. Oh, sorry. We have a lot of little blue stem. We have blue grama. We have some big blue stem and buffalo grass. This area gets about 30 inches of rainfall annually, and we had 3 pastures that ranged from 100 to 200 acres each. What we decided to do was, in our first summer, we put cattle in the pastures with GPS collars. We didn't burn anything. We didn't do anything to the pastures. We just wanted to get a baseline of where they were grazing and where they weren't grazing. Then we went back the next year and we picked spots where the cattle were avoiding in the pasture. And we did some burns in March, 1 in each, or 2 in each of our research pastures. We turned the animals in there in April with GPS collars again. We also burned some patches in June to see if animals would react differently to a March burn versus a June burn. And then we pulled the cattle out in October. This is Catherine Hale. She's the graduate student that worked on this. She worked so hard on this project. She sampled vegetation inside and outside of each of our burn treatments, and she sampled those every 2 months to try to track what was happening with the plants. And the main goal with that was to look at the forage quality in the burned areas and the unburned areas. She analyzed those forage samples and looked at crude protein, NDF and ADF for fiber, and total digestible nutrients as well. And another thing that we were interested in is what was happening with the minerals that were available in those forages. So we also sampled them for calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, sodium, iron, zinc, copper, manganese, and molybdenum. So we'll go straight to some of the results. These green dots are showing what was happening in our growing season burn forage samples, while the orange dots are showing what was happening in our dormant season, so our March burns. And then our gray dots are showing the forage crude protein in our unburned areas. The long and short of what we found was that it didn't really matter if you were burning in March or in the end of June, but that the forage stayed high quality for about 5 months. By 6 months, the quality of that forage had dropped to what the unburned forage levels were. And so you can see that some of our forage quality was as high as 14 or 15% crude protein, which is good for native prairie. Although in March and April, we'd expect to have a little bit higher. These are composite samples, so we're sampling everything and not sorting out, the new growth from the old growth. So by September, we still had crude protein levels right above 10%. This was the end of September that she sampled those, and that was in the growing season burn, which, can have implications for when you're starting with some of your winter protein supplement. We've had similar results in other research where we've found that we can have crude protein levels of 10 or 11% even into mid-October. We also found that our phosphorus levels were increased in the burned areas over what we found in the unburned areas. And similarly, they started high and then dropped as months after burn continued on. And at about 6 months, there was no differences. And so this is interesting. It's kind of something similar to what we've found in some of our other research where we tried to burn portions of the pasture every 6 months to maintain the quality of the pasture at the highest level available for our livestock. So in our mineral responses, in our spring burn, we found that At 2 months post-burn, we had 6 minerals that were higher in our burned areas versus our unburned, and 4 minerals that were similar, whether they were burned or unburned. At 4 months, there was actually an additional mineral. I can't remember which one that was. We had 7 minerals that were higher and 3 minerals that were the same. And then by 6 months, they were all pretty much the same. In the right picture, you can see what a little blue stem plant looks like. This picture, I think, is from 2 or 3 weeks after our burn treatment. And the cattle are definitely focusing on grazing those little blue stem plants, which are pretty notorious for losing their quality fairly quickly when there's no kind of burning happening in a pasture. After our summer burns, we also had 7 minerals that were higher following in the burn treatments versus the unburned treatments. And we didn't sample that one 6 months after treatment. That would have been December, January. But at 3 months post-burn, we had 6 minerals. So they were remaining higher for at least 3 months following the burn. And this picture on the right is what those burn treatments looked like in October. So now let's talk about the cattle distribution, because that was the goal, was to change the cattle distribution. This is showing cattle points from across one of our pastures. Here we have a hotspot analysis. Areas that are in blue are areas that cattle avoided. Areas that are tan they didn't avoid or select for. And then the red areas are areas that they were selecting hard for. They really preferred those areas. And so this was from our first year before we had any burn treatments occurring. And so we put those burn treatments in areas. We tried to keep them as much in the blue area as we could, but we were a bit limited as far as where we could put fire breaks and getting equipment and everything. But these are the locations that we selected for. We had 2 patches that we burned in March and 2 patches that we burned in the end of June. Oh, I forgot I had animation. Sorry. Spring burns and our summer burns. And then we tracked that distribution again. And so you can see that those areas were initially cold, so they were avoided from what the GPS color data showed us. And then after we used fire to increase the forage quality of those locations, you can see how the cattle distribution dramatically changed. And now those locations are red from the cattle distribution from where we're seeing clusters of GPS points in our data. I would point out that not only did we change avoided areas to red areas, but we also changed some of the areas that had initially been selected for, so they were red on the left side, have now changed to either a tan or a blue color. And so those areas that were avoided are now being used, and the areas that were initially highly selected for are not having the same grazing pressure that they did initially. And so using this type of strategy can help to get more even distribution across the pasture through time by using fire to draw animals to the high quality forage. As a grazing behavior researcher, we dramatically changed a lot of things about grazing distribution. I won't get too much into this, but the distance that the cattle traveled in a daily over a 24-hour period changed post-fire. They traveled shorter distances because they knew where they could find the high quality vegetation. They changed the rate of movement in riparian areas. They were actually loafing in the stream areas more rather than actively grazing in there. And so there was a lot of different changes. This is pretty dramatic for me to see because it's very difficult to change this many things about grazing distribution in grazing behaviors with other strategies. So this graph is showing selection for and avoidance of different areas. For any of the bars that are above a 0, for 0 to 1, that shows selection for, whereas the areas below 0 are showing avoidance. Our orange bars are our spring burns, and our green bars are the summer burns. And then the crosshatch bar is areas that were not burned. So the rest of the pasture, which was most of the pasture in reality. And so you can see here on this timeline, this is weeks since collar deployment. So from when we put the collars on till when we took the collars off, took the cows out and took the collars off. So the flame is showing the spring burn, and then you can see how these orange bars get very big. And so that's showing that the animals are selecting strongly for that spring burn initially. And they're avoiding the summer burn. Well, we knew they would avoid the summer burned area because it hadn't been burned yet, and the year prior, they hadn't been selecting for it. Then we burned the summer burn patch, where you can see the second flame mark, and then the orange bars start to be the bars that are avoided, the area that they're not selecting for, and the green bars are the ones that they're selecting for. So they've now switched off of using that spring burn and are predominantly using the summer burn. And so folks often ask us, well, isn't this bad for the grass to have a fire and be grazed? And the reality is that that short period of grazing doesn't have any kind of negative effects on the grass plant's response to having both of those things happen to it. Okay, so the other thing that we looked at was the time spent in the riparian area. So we had some stream areas in the pasture that we were concerned about, animals using excessively. Animals are drawn to areas not just because they're drinking water out of the stream, but also because it tends to have higher quality vegetation growing right along our streams. And what we found was we didn't have any difference in the time spent in the stream area, but we did have a difference in what the activity that they were doing in that stream area was. And so we saw that post-fire, they were spending more time resting near the stream and less time actively grazing near the stream. And so although we didn't completely eliminate use along the stream area, we did change what they were actually doing. And that change can help with allowing the vegetation along the stream to grow, which we know helps filter the water that's running off of these pastures into these stream areas. We have a current project working on virtual fence and streams, and in that project we found that by excluding animal use from the riparian area for 2 weeks prior to big rainfall events, we can reduce the E. coli load in those streams by 85 to 90%. And so trying to limit animal use in riparian areas is an important thing for pastures and for water quality. And here we were not limited, we weren't stopping them from using it, but we were preventing them from grazing as much, which can help provide that stream buffer to filter that water as it comes into the stream area. And so the next steps in this research is that we had a student that was doing similar things, but comparing fire to mowing to see if you could get the same positive benefit out of mowing patches in your pasture for folks that have areas that aren't too rocky and you could get in there and actually brush hog. And so we were comparing the diet quality of the vegetation in the mowed area and the burned area, and GPS location of cattle and how much they're drawn to those. And the last project is doing it with concentrated grazing. So fencing animals and doing high density grazing for a short period of time, and then allowing the animals to pick whether they like the burned areas or the heavily grazed areas for the rest of the growing season. And so hopefully I can come back and share some of those results as we have those students finish up as well. This is me. Feel free to email me if you have questions about this research. We're also pretty active on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Oklahoma Lands, where we share lots of land management information. And we have another one called Prairie Restored as well for our prairie project. With that, I can turn it back to Dana. Oops, I wasn't supposed to go to the next one.
Thanks, Laura.
Yes.
Goodman, actually. We're friends, so I call her Laura. Anyway, well, I guess we're keeping the questions till the end, Dr.
Yes,
Biggs.
so as a reminder for our attendees, if you have a question, you can either put that in the chat or the Q&A, whatever is easiest for you. And just in the interest of time and consistency, we're going to answer all of those at the end of the presentation. So certainly want to thank Dr. Goodman for being on with us today and look for really, practical, useful information, particularly those of us from Western Oklahoma, and certainly look forward to those other studies. And don't worry, you're already penciled in. We'll have you back.
Thanks.
You just need to let us know when you're done, and we'll probably build something around you. But as a Western Oklahoma girl, I appreciate those type of grazing things, but I also have an appreciation for my counterparts on the eastern side of the state. And with that, we'll transition to Brian Freking. And Brian, I'm going to let you introduce your guest there. And Dr. Goodman, I'll have you bring your slides down, stop your share there. We'll let Brian, hopefully we don't run into any technology challenges this afternoon, but Brian, I'll let you bring up slides and do the introduction when you're ready.
All right, thank you, Dr. Biggs, and it is my pleasure to do a get to job today, and that's work with my coworker here, Liana Palmer, and also David Pickle, our producer, and I'm still working on trying to multitask and talk at the same time to get to that first slide.
You probably should let Liana talk then. So
Yeah,
I should have put her on the hot spot, not just you. So
are you seeing a slide with David Pickle and
yes, sir. Yes, sir. We got that
Okay.
Master Cattleman sign posted there front and center. So take
right,
it away
so
whenever y'all are ready.
I appreciate you, and do have this kind of story of the three of us here together. David Pickle was in my very first Master Cattleman class. He is an OSU graduate, but he did participate in quite a few OSU programs, not only Master Cattleman, but OK Steer Feed Out. We did some artificial insemination programs with your own cattle, and then the main reason we had you on is my knowledge of your rotational grazing system, and we appreciate everything you do in management. And so my first question before we ever get started, I kind of gave you some homework of the number one question to get accomplished today. What one best management practice would you want producers to consider implementing in their operations if you had to pick one?
Well, that's a pretty personal question. I think it's a lot of it depends on what you want to accomplish. For me personally, it would be grazing management. From my experience when I got out of college and moved back home and started ranching for a living, we had 113 cows, and we were feeding 3 round bales of hay per cow per winter. And, I got tired of baling hay all over the country, so I kind of went to work on that, trying to figure out how I could get less dependent on hay. And when I finally, I guess, got to the end of my cow-calf career, we had almost 250 cows, and we were feeding 8/10 of the bale of hay
Okay.
per cow per winter on the same acreage.
Yeah.
So grazing management to me is pretty important.
So the number of cows you've mentioned real quickly, I've thrown up the next slide and we're probably focusing on a little bit of this land. It's not everything that you work with, but there's basically a 320 or 360. I don't know. You'd have to tell me the exact acres on it, but the one in red here is kind of one of your grazing systems that I know I started working with you years ago and got some blame for it too, right?
Yes, sir,
we
it's all
kinda-
your fault. Yeah.
So- And so we have some native hay, which falls right into Dr. Goodman's talk today a little bit, but you might talk a little bit about your history of your operation and how you manage these two systems a little bit differently as well.
Well, the native is hay. We bale it once a year. We've got another 60 acres over south that we bale. And I don't know, to me, it's native. I mean, we've got some big blue stem, little blue stem, sage grass, what we call rabbit grass. I think it's velvet panicum, in lower spots. We bale that for hay. It's been in my family for 3 generations, and my grandpa used to bale it with the mules and the stationary hay press, and it would take them 2 weeks to bale it. And me and my helper baled it in 3 days this year. We just finished baling it yesterday, as a matter of fact, and it made 359 bales off 100 acres, which is pretty good when you don't have any fertilizer or weed spray, other than the expense of baling it and property taxes.
Yeah.
But and then we use the hay, and we also used to cut a lot of hay out of the pastures to manage pastures. That was my dad's deal. You know, we had persimmon sprouts and stuff like that, and if you don't do something to it, it just kind of grows up. And so he would use hay equipment to keep pastures clean. You know, we cut a pasture every 3 or 4 years maybe. But I no longer bale hay out of the pastures. We just use it for grazing, and it kind of worked out pretty well. You know, when I graduated from OSU in 1991, thought I was pretty smart, and we had fescue on the pastures, and we'd studied a little bit about fescue and one thing and another, but I realize now why our fescue worked for us as well as it did, because in the wintertime we were feeding native hay. We were diluting it with native hay, and then in the summertime we weren't feeding hay, but that's when the fescue would hit us the hardest. And so, you know, that's when we started, you know, introducing some different stuff, trying to do some things different to manage that fescue during the summer. And that's where the evolution of, you know, stock density, hot wire, water tanks, and it went from, I think, 12 paddocks to, then after I got out of the cow-calf deal and started running yearlings, then it went to, you know, 1,000,000 pounds per acre, high stock density type of thing. That was pretty intense.
Liana, you got a question for David?
I just wanted you to talk a little bit about your record keeping system. Is that on a phone or what does that look like for you?
That's in a spiral bound notebook.
Okay.
As far as grazing management, like I moved cattle this morning, and I keep a little book and I write it down. And, you know, the pasture the cattle went into was 75 days of rest. Been 75 days since cattle have been in there. And we've had real good growing season this year. We've had a lot of rainfall. So, you know, it was, a lot of the neighbors think, well, it needs to be brush hog, you know, and they used to. They used to ask me, you know, when are you going to brush hog that? Well, you know, it's going to be 40 days because the cows are way over there. But I just keep track of how long the cattle have been out of the pasture. And I watch that pretty close. I don't, you know, to me, a plant needs to recover. And that means when I start seeing seed heads, I know that that plant's recovered. Maybe it's not at its, you know, highest nutritional state, but it tells me that it's ready to be grazed and it'll survive for another grazing. So that record keeping is just, it's nothing fancy. And you have to do it every time you move cattle, you know, you have to write it down, because if you forget and wait and then try to write it down tomorrow, and I've forgotten it.
So speaking of that, you know, we've still got this picture of the overhead aerial view and the portion in red. If I remember right, I met you in 1995, somewhere in that range is when we kind of established, I'll call it friendship. You may not
Okay.
call me a friend.
Right,
I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
But, you know, we hadn't developed a lot of the rotational grazing system yet. We kind of drew that out on paper and kind of tell us, you know, what has changed from 1995 to 2025 for you in that red area.
Well, parts of it has changed and parts of it hasn't changed. You know, we installed a lot of electric fence, I think. Some of the fences are single wire, some of them are double wire, you know, 2 wires. And I think I had about 17 miles of wire out there at one time.
Okay.
I use quite a bit of poly wire temporary fence, particularly when I was running yearlings. So I took some of the hot wires that you and I had drawn out, put in. They weren't quite right for poly wire, and you know, to move cattle easy. So I did a little bit of changes there. But really, I mean, if you went out there today and walked around, I think you would recognize the place and the way it's laid out. It hasn't changed. On the east end there, you know, I did a wagon wheel deal there, which, you know, it's like trying to stuff a circle in a square. It worked, but it was back to the grazing distribution deal. For if you take the hypotenuse of that triangle there, that's a long way for cattle to travel.
Yeah.
And I didn't leave that in for very long.
Yeah. So I think this is a picture of 2000 or 1995. Apparently they didn't have color images at that point. So, you know, that previous shot, it doesn't look like there's a lot of differences, but now we look at that kind of that same period 24 years later, 25 years, whatever it is. And I noticed some things on this map about like streaks where maybe you've unrolled hay or something like that. So this is a winter picture. So it's kind of interesting.
That was last year.
This was last year according to Google Earth. So it's neat to use those tools to see how land has changed, and maybe how your management has changed. I know when we started working, we kind of took some of your weed spraying money and put it into electric fence. And so I agree with you. You had some spots that you had more fescue, and it's kind of gotten a lot more diverse. And so, you know, if you want to explain a little bit about your hay management, I think that'd be great too. I kind of stole one of your questions, didn't I, Liana?
The hay, I haul hay in the summertime. I put it out on the fence, put a temporary string around it. Then I use a little thing to pull behind the side by side and unroll hay with in the wintertime, because I don't like to fire tractor up in the wintertime. You know, the side by side doesn't make very deep ruts. You may can see some hay on the west end there over to the left.
Yeah.
Sitting there on the fence. Looks like I've got some stacked up there.
So on the east side down there by the wooded areas, you're all your cows. So they're in a pretty small area.
Yeah.
I was able to identify those, but so again, you have about how many head of cattle right now on this 320 acres?
Currently, I've got 100 cows.
Okay.
But that's I also every once in a while I will make some small bales if we have a lot of forage in the fall. and the conditions are right, I'll make some small bales, put sisal twine on them and just bale graze them, just leave them sitting out there. That works pretty good. If the conditions are right, if you get regrowth after you bale it, a good friend of mine, he tries that some. We've talked about, you know, how that works, and it works pretty good, but you can't depend on it every year.
Yeah. Just another tool in your toolbox, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
So I'll jump to this real picture real quick. And when we went into some of this rotational grazing, water was always a critical area. And
Yeah.
so I think this might have been one of your first tires. I know you've modified it since then, and it's this steel cage in the middle because
Yeah.
I do believe in hot days like today, they want to get in it, right? So, but you might explain this. I think you perfected the art of actually cutting these tires out. I know we had workshops way back when, but you actually perfected some of this. So go ahead and talk a little bit about this tire.
Cutting those tires out, that's why my elbows and wrists still hurt, I think. But you got the cattle, when it gets hot, they want to climb in there, and you'll invariably have some cows that just don't tolerate heat very well. And when they get in there, they mess up your float valve, and you get a pretty large water bill if you're not going to the pasture every day to check cattle. So I just put that panel in there and screwed that board to it, and that keeps them out. And they water just fine like that.
So you've kind of got water like these tires in almost pretty close to almost every paddock, not quite, but pretty close. So
Yeah.
I just remember this maybe being your first one that you ever
Yeah,
maybe
I think
installed.
it was. I think
Yeah.
it was.
So I'll jump to the next one. Last week I happened to be out catching your hired help moving the cows, and so on the left side of the screen, you've kind of got some Johnson grass, maybe it's got some skeletons, if you will. You know, the stems are still there, but they had just been moved out of that area. You can't really see it, but there's an electric fence with some hay in the background there, and they just moved into this green area. So kind of talk your way through some of this forage that you're seeing there.
Well, that's Johnson grass and Bermuda grass underneath it, crabgrass. You can see the Johnson grass is putting on a seed head over there to the right. That tells me that it's time to move, and you can see what's left behind. You know, that what's behind them will leave out again, and it's never as good as it is the first time you graze it. You know, if you graze through that 4 or 5 cycles during a grazing period, during grazing season, and I hate to say grazing season because we graze year round. I mean, I constantly move cattle. We're there'll be a lot of fescue down in the low ground. That's not real prominent now, but it will be in December, January, and but it seems like each cycle you go through with that Johnson grass, it becomes a little less palatable to the cattle. And I think it's because they don't want to take the time to sit there and pick the leaves off those leftover stems. You can go in there and knock it down with a brush hog, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, if I want to knock it down, you put high stock density on that, and they'll flatten it out, and new plants will come up through it.
People usually would say you're kind of crazy for wanting to graze Johnson grass, but I remember you quoting your dad wished that, it was in the ditch rows and you kind of wanted it out in the pasture.
Yeah,
so
Dad used to always say everybody needs a little Johnson grass. He always wanted some of it. And so I came across some seed and planted some.
Yeah.
It can get away from you. If you don't, you gotta, it's about a 45, 50 day deal, as far as resting it.
Okay. So here's a picture of that same where the cattle actually moved into it. So that, we're a little bit further, I guess, to the north.
Yes, sir.
And here's your hay bales that are stacked within the pastures, and they've got kind of poly wire around them. So you move your hay around every year a little bit and where you store it maybe, or we do get stuck in ruts and put it in the same spot, don't we? But we still graze it, don't we?
Yeah. See the hard hand remembered to put the string around the hay. That's good.
Okay, well, that's good. I didn't know. I didn't know if that was
Any-
permanent or not.
No, I don't leave strings. We move the strings with the cattle.
All right. So then, one of the other things like I said, we've done some AI together. You've
Yeah.
got some of the fanciest equipment in the
Oh,
whole
boy,
state,
yeah.
don't you?
Yes,
So
I do.
it doesn't take a whole lot to make cattle work.
No.
And so you might talk a little bit about this picture and what do you see out front there that's helped you? The steps is what I'm getting
Yeah,
at,
the
but
steps. I had some scales under that at one point in time, and they were, they raised that up
pretty
4 or
high.
5 inches.
Yep.
And first cow we turned out of it, she couldn't get out of it. She got out, but then Dad said, "Well, we're gonna have to have a step. We're gonna have to." So we came up with that step, or we built it out of some old, I don't know what, old cross ties or something there.
Yep.
And it worked, but since then my scales quit working and I couldn't get them fixed, so I took them out, but I left the step. Step's still pretty handy.
And I think what I've seen working cattle with you, instead of them running out, they have to kind of
Yeah,
check where they're stepping, and
Yeah,
it does
they-
kind of slow them down.
yeah, they do. They
So-
don't just hit. They don't just come out of there
Yeah.
full blast.
So we've utilized your operation quite a bit in Master Cattleman program to talk about things like grazing management, hay management, the cattle handling. Maybe that's one of the things I haven't asked you yet. Have you seen some disposition changes in the cattle when you get to working with them by rotating?
Oh, yeah, yeah. By moving the cattle, in July we wean calves, and I don't own these cattle. I contract graze them, and the man that owned them, he said, I want to wean calves. I want to ship calves off those cows on, relatively early July. And that was like in June when we were talking about it. And then we realized that the Friday after he wanted to ship cattle was July 4th. And they weren't gonna have sale that day, so we definitely didn't want to ship them then, so it got backed up, and then it rained, and there was just, we finally got the cattle shipped out of there about I don't know, it was 2 or 3 weeks after we started talking about it, and he's a cow man, he knows how things are, and he said, "Is that gonna be a problem? Are you gonna have trouble catching them?" I told him, I said, "Don't worry about it, I can catch them anytime."
Yep.
And literally, there's a lane that goes through the middle of the place, and the cattle are used to going into the lane, and they just go till they find the open gate, and it's probably half a mile long and about 40 feet wide, and so I just open the gate, get out of the way, and I don't have any gates open at the lane, and they go to the end of the lane, and the other end of the lane is going in the pen.
Yeah.
And I move them through the pen. So basically, moving cattle 3 or 4 times, every 3 or 4 days or whenever, they are very.
They're used to you. Yeah.
They're-
It's
yeah.
like that feed truck coming to feed them on a daily basis. You
Yeah,
bet. So
yeah. that's
if
right.
you'll notice the date here, July 21 of 2022, we did a tour of your place and it rained like cats and dogs.
No.
So having you talk
Yeah.
today, I'm hoping it rains again. So.
I do too. I do too.
So here's a little bit of picture of some of the history of your cattle. You've
Yeah.
talked about the ultra high stock density, 150 cows on 15 acres. Water is always a critical element there. So you've got these big
Yeah.
tanks.
When was that picture taken?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have the answer, the date on that one.
That's summertime, and you can see
Yep.
that black cow by that water tank.
She's thinking about taking a bath,
And
isn't
you
she?
can
Yeah.
see the fescue stems.
Yeah.
That fescue's working on that cow.
Yeah. So here's another, so here's 2013. This was back to a girl you had working for a few hours a day, and
Yeah.
she wanted a job and you gave her a job to move cattle almost
Yeah.
hourly.
Yeah, that's when we were running yearlings, and yeah, I'd put up a bunch of strings ahead of the cattle and tell her to go over there every hour and roll one up.
And we don't recommend that anymore
No,
than
we do
hourly.
not. No, we do not. No.
But we, just by doing it, we learned a lot, didn't we? Yeah.
Christopher Columbus took a chance and he didn't
Yeah.
fall off the edge of the earth.
Yeah. So strip grazing, I think this was a picture, you planted some turnips or something like that, and they didn't graze them right away, but by God, when they're ready, that's when they graze them, don't they?
Yeah,
So,
yeah, those are some calves that I bought, stalker calves, and that's a trap where I planted some fall pasture and was using it to receive the cattle on, and that's not really the best thing either. That good green pasture's a little too hot for
okay,
fresh shelborn calf.
gotcha. I think I may have, so you've narrowed them down in this picture, quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that can be
Yeah.
bad too when they're
Yes, sir.
calving.
Yes, sir.
Those cows want to find a place away from the
Yes,
other
sir.
cows to have a calf.
Yes, sir.
So again,
Yes,
I don't know
sir.
if you've learned anything. I've
Yeah,
learned a lot
I
from you,
learned
so.
that's on a different place
Yeah.
than the place you had in the slide. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's.
So, when we started thinking about Oklahoma and me from the north, I may not have thought about shade much, but we had to start thinking about this when in July weather. And by golly, we've got a contraption we drew out on a napkin as well here. So
Well, the egrets like it.
yeah, they did. So I think what I'll do now, we're kind of running out of time, so I think I'll stop sharing and open it up for discussion on questions from everybody. So does that work for you, Dr. Biggs?
Absolutely. As a reminder to any of our attendees, if you have questions, you can put those either in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll have Dr. Goodman, whenever you're ready, you can turn your video back on. We have some questions there. Not seeing anything. I'm making sure I didn't miss anything. Keep me up to date. Dr. Beck, make sure I don't miss a time or two. So I'm gonna go ahead.
I'm gonna start the discussion with you, David, and maybe this will inspire some questions. Last week, we had a producer in Western Oklahoma talk about his grazing management and, his rule of thumb. He was taught from a ranch management school was one bale of hay per cow per year. And he is able to get that through moderate stocking rates and extending his grazing on some dormant forages. We've had some comments and some discussion from, and my experience in Western Arkansas, just across the border from you. We have a lot of producers that feed hay from Thanksgiving all the way through to, nearly May. And they're budgeting 3 to 5 bales per acre per cow. With your management, you said you've gotten down to less than a bale per cow per year. What managements do you think is the key that gets you to that point? And your stocking rate isn't, especially low, right at 3 acres per cow. So, where do you think is the power in your management that gives you that ability?
Well, I think where that comes from is when you use higher stock densities, you essentially have to slow your rotation down. So it takes you longer to move across your entire
System.
your
whole system. Yep.
So basically, you're in I know when I was running yearling cattle, I was in stockpile mode 365 days a year, and I didn't even realize it. I mean, I was just grazing the cow herd. The herd of yearlings was just like a giant amoeba. It just oozed across the farm, and that was time. That was allowing the grass to grow behind them. So when you came back to that, you just had a jungle. And I think that I think you can manage that. You can kind of tune in, zero in on what works at your location. And what will happen is you will have more stockpile forage going into the winter, so you can start feeding hay later. And as a result of that, you will have more early grass. Maybe if you get pretty serious with it, maybe you have some different species of grass come in. If you're really leaving plant material behind and you're not leaving any bare soil, and you're leaving some, you know, and the cattle are mashing it down into the contact with the soil. I mean, the dirt stays warm. You know, I know snow melt, when we get a little snow, man, my place melts off before the neighbors does. And I think it's because the soil's warmer. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that I don't understand, but I've just tried, and so it's pretty complex.
So Paul, do you think harvest efficiency has a lot to do with that too? Was that one of the things you probably would think of? You know, when
Yeah.
we think about a non-rotation, you know, they're going to be they're selective. And so just like Laura was talking about with the burn unit areas, they get a little more efficient, and I bet David's close to 70% harvest efficiency is my guess, if not more.
So when we look at stockpiling, if you have cattle pass through, they've already selectively grazed, they don't want to graze that back. But the way you're stockpiling, this is the first time through on that regrowth, it's a true stockpile. You know, that is, fresh growth. One thing, I notice in your pictures is that Johnson grass. To me, that's an indicator species. Laura can, question me or tell me I'm wrong, but it is an ice cream plant. There's a reason why it grows in the bar ditch, but you never find it hardly in pastures unless they're very well managed, because cattle will graze it out first, especially early in the summer. So, with that, we know, we can tell you're getting adequate rest to keep all those preferred species in those pastures. We have a comment from David Lawman saying, if I can get back to it, have you been able to incorporate and maintain legumes in these pastures over time? And if so, what has this done to your fertilizer expense, or what is your fertilizer expense now with your current management?
Well, I don't use any fertilizer. I haven't used any fertilizer in several years.
You're a lime believer, but
Yeah, I lime. I do like to put out lime. But I don't, here in Southeast Oklahoma, we've got a lot of opportunities for chicken litter, and I've used chicken litter. I've used commercial fertilizer. Used to, I would cut a patch of hay, go to the co-op, buy a buggy fertilizer, run home, sling it out, and I tell Dad, well, if it rains, it'll make the fertilizer work. If it doesn't, I'll get my hay baled. I was just kind of hedging, betting against myself. But I don't use any fertilizer. And the legumes are pretty fickle. I have quite a bit of ladino clover. I have spots of arrowleaf clover, and then I have what we call yellow hop. It's really good. But as far as, I used to try to plant legumes. I used to try to overseed but they're just pretty fickle. So I don't work very hard on legumes. I just, if I've got them, good. If I don't, well, they'll be back when conditions get right.
All right. So Dr. Goodman, we're going to move to you, but stay on the eastern side of the state when it comes. So we've got a question from Gary ask, would burning work on non-native grasses or eastern Oklahoma and northwest Arkansas is what we're thinking here. Pastures there on consistent primarily of Bermuda, fescue, a mix of clovers and other grasses. So maybe talk to us about burning in other parts
Yeah.
of the state.
So thanks, Rosalind. So I think I mean, it depends on which species you're talking about. I know there's been some research done on burning Bermuda grass in Texas, and they also had, so part of the reason that we're getting a change in the minerals in the mineral availability in the plant is because there's actually a change in the mineral availability in the soil after a burn. And so they were measuring phosphorus availability to Bermuda grass, and that was increased with a burn treatment. And so there has been some done with Bermuda, but with fescue, I think that there's been less success with fescue. I think I don't know if Brian Pugh's on the call or not, but I think there's some research in Missouri where they had done some burning and it they had gotten some crown kill on fescue. So it would depend on which planted forage you were trying it on. In native pasture on the east side of the state, for sure, you'd get similar results. So anytime all of these native plants were getting burned a lot. And so, and that was probably driving grazing distribution of elk and bison and all of the different animals that we had historically here, even some pronghorn. So, yeah, I don't know if I answered everything.
Yeah, I think that's good. We've got 2 more questions. And so, Dr. Goodman, I'm going to hang with you for this first one. On the burning, on the crude protein responses graph at 4 and 6 month data, I don't know if we have a question or a comment, but maybe speak to it. Curious as to seeing the difference in crude protein at 6 months when the 4 to 5 month period. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my computer there. When the 4 to 5 month period is dry versus when it's wet. So if we look at 4 and 6 month comparison in crude protein, but during that 4 to 5 months, what does it look like? We've had a lot more rain this year, right? What are our comparisons potentially between dry and wet conditions?
Yeah. So it definitely depends on if it rains or not. And that's actually why we pick the timing that we do for our burns. So if it doesn't rain, plants aren't going to grow whether you've burned them or not burned them. And so that's part of the reason that we like to burn just portions of a pasture, because it doesn't, if you burn the whole thing, then you don't, and it doesn't rain, then you're not going to have anything to graze, right? So it kind of buffers that issue with whether it's going to rain or not. But we specifically pick spring burns because we know we're going to get rain in April and May. You can also pick your burn time when you know what the soil moisture already is, because part of how quickly those plants grow back afterwards is how much soil moisture there is when the burn occurs. So soil moisture that occurs before actually isn't reduced much by the burn. So they're going to grow if it's been raining prior to. The summer burns we pick, typically we do a lot of early August burns because we start to get rain again in August and September. And that's pretty true across the state, except for the Panhandle, where they're a little bit more on the summer monsoon schedule than New Mexico is, where they get a jump in July. But yeah, if you didn't have rain, you wouldn't have much new growth, so you wouldn't expect to have the increase in forage quality. The project I shared today was in 2020, 2021, if I'm remembering correctly. But yeah, that's an interesting question that would be fun for us to look at, because we've done this research for so long. We could look at drier periods and what kind of forage response we get. But
Great, thank you. I have a
Mhm.
question from Brett, and I think this is moving to Mr. Pickle. A lot of rocks in Brett's pasture. Apparently, parts of it nearly impossible to get a post in the ground. Have you experienced that? Any alternative suggestions as we talk about fencing with particularly temporary fencing?
Well, that can be a problem. We, on our place, we have places where it's, we have small rocks under the ground and, you'll twist your ankle trying to get a post in. I don't know, if the cattle are broke to the hot wire, like my cattle are, you can put the post really far apart and it can just sag to the ground or like this morning when I moved cattle, there was a piece of poly wire laying on the ground and they wouldn't walk over it. So, don't let that defeat you. There, maybe you could come up, maybe depending on how far of a span you got to go, maybe you could come up with some, 3 or 4 posts that you don't have to stick in the ground. That's got like a big coffee can full of with a post stuck in it and concrete around it that you could just sit there on top of the ground. If the cattle are broke to the wire, to the electric fence, they're not gonna try it. You know what I mean? I have turned cattle with some pretty sloppy fences.
Dr. Beck, I'm not seeing any additional questions or
We have a question about the, unless I missed it, Johnson grass after the first frost regrowth. We have a lot of concerns about nitrates in the summer and prussic acid on Johnson grass in the fall. Looks like that's one of your forage bases. So if you would want to touch on that a little bit.
There's a lot of people that call me, and I've got one friend in particular that will call me every year with the same question. And I always tell him the same thing. We'll turn them in and watch them, see what happens. I don't have any problem with it. And I think the cattle, I don't know. I'm not going to say they build an immunity to it. They get used to it. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I don't know. But I think the reason I don't have any problem with it is because I'm not fertilizing it. I'm not pushing it. I'm just, I remember one year I planted some hay grazer and I was going to cut it for hay and I pushed it. I put fertilizer on it. I did everything just right by the book. And it rained and it came up and it got about 12, 14 inches high and then it quit raining and it didn't grow anymore for the rest of the summer. That was in 1998. I remember that. That was my first drought of my professional life. I never will forget 1998. And, we cut it. And I think, Brian, you had some stuff that we put on it and it was like going to kill cattle. You don't, I'm like, well, what am I gonna do? Well, you can't do anything with it. Well, to me, that was a result of me pushing it. Basically, I started a fire and then I had to put it out. Now I don't push the stuff. I mean, grazing management, when you have a grazing cell, if you go all in and you build paddocks and you do stock density and you work and you're doing that, if it gets dry, you just slow down. If it gets wet and the grass is growing fast, you move cattle fast. I'm moving cattle now. I've been moving cattle about every 3 or 4 days, and my yard's turning brown. I've got a place out in the pasture that I watch. I drive by it nearly every day. When I start seeing it turn, I know it's getting dry, and I'll put the brakes on. I'll hold cattle. I'll start slowing the rotation down. I'll leave cattle an extra day or two. And I'm not pushing anything, trying to, I'm not nothing on my farm runs on nitrous oxide. It runs on plain old gas. And I think that is a problem with Johnson grass. I think.
Well, my recommendation follows yours, David. It's find the cow you love the least and turn her out in the pasture and see how it goes.
That is
So,
exactly what that would say.
all right. Well, we've got a couple of comments and Dr. Beck, keep me on tap here because not all of them are coming through on my side because I didn't see the Johnson grass question. I apologize to that. Do have a comment on the difficulties in driving those posts from Doug. Doug says the 3/8 or 1/2 inch fiberglass posts with spring clips work best for them. So maybe something to think about there. I'm going to take one more question and then we're going to call it good. Dr. Goodman, I'm going to move this to you. Would a controlled burn or bale grazing be more effective for getting rid of broom's edge blue stem?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's ever compared those. I know that if you're going to use prescribed fire, then late summer, early fall fire is better. And I will say that we have had good luck with burning in August and allowing animals to graze it because it actually will regrow. And when it regrows, it's just as good as any of these other grasses. I mean, the problem with broom sedge is that it just matures so fast and it gets, the stem, you'll cut your hand open trying to pull a plant with, and, but when it regrows, it'll look like a wheat pasture in September if you've burned it. I don't know about, bale grazing. I've never tried that. I'm not sure. Sorry.
Well, it sounds like we've got another opportunity for a study for, we just need some more research dollars to get that through. So if anybody interested in that, you can contact Dr. Goodman
I think
with that. So
I'm going to touch on that. Nothing I think's been published or research wise, but I think the theory between the bale grazing is to move nutrients to those areas. A lot of times broom sedge is an issue where we have lower your fertility, phosphorus issues. We're spreading out our hay feeding, that helps other grasses stay more competitive. That's I think the theory behind some of the bale grazing, just spreading out those nutrients, making other grasses competitive with that broom sedge. It seems to work, with a lot of producers in those types of management, but also they're rotationally grazing. They're, keeping track of their line, and this happens in well-managed situations. So I think it's, to me, I've seen the work with burning. It's all in multiple things to take care of that issue from what I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, the pH changes. So a lot of times we see this in areas where people have cut a bunch, maybe they've thinned some cross timbers or they've thinned some other forest. And so then the pH has changed in those soils because of the trees being there for a while. And so then you have broom sedge, it's the first thing that comes back. So, obviously pH and phosphorus application, pH limits the phosphorus availability. Anyway, that all makes sense with the fire too. Yeah, I could see you doing that with the bale grazing. That would make sense. Same thing with the fire is it does change the pH of the soil to a degree and it releases phosphorus. So yeah, it would be interesting to compare those. Cool.
all right. Well, want to thank our presenters today, Dr. Goodman and Mr. Pickle, for joining us, and for our extension educators for coordinating the presentations as well. We'll be back next week, same place, same time, just on a different date. We'll be back here next Thursday, and we'll have presentations from the eastern side of the state with the Emerson family, their grazing management practices in McIntosh County, with Josh Emerson, Pam Ward, and Earl Ward facilitating that. So join us back
That will be August 14th.
August 14th. Thank you. I'm sorry. I just caught that. Dr. Beck's keeping me in line today. We'll be taking a break. Let's correct that. We're taking a break next week. See you back on the 14th, and taking, I guess, almost a 2-week break, I suppose, here. 2 weeks. You see us back on the 14th with our friends from McIntosh County, and hear a little bit more about grazing systems. And then we'll finish out this session on the 21st as well as the 28th for this Rancher series. So again, want to thank our presenters today. And Dr. Beck, what else have I forgotten? You're muted there, Dr. Beck.
I believe that is taking care of it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. We'll hope for maybe a little bit of rain this weekend, cooler